Chapter 1 of Naudsonce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Naudsonce by H. Beam Piper. Bishop Berkeley's famous question about the sound of a falling tree may have no standing in science. But there is a highly interesting question about sound that science needs to consider. Naudsonce, Part 1. The sun warmed Mark Howell's back pleasantly. Underfoot, the moss-like stuff was soft and yielding, and there was a fragrance in the air unlike anything he had ever smelled. He was going to like this planet. He knew it. The question was, how would it and its people like him? He watched the little figures advancing across the fields from the mound, with the village out of sight on the other end of it, and the combat car circling lazily on contragravity above. Major Louis Goffredo, the Marine officer, spoke without lowering his binoculars. "They have a tubular thing about 12 feet long. 6 of them are carrying it on poles, 3 to a side, and a couple more are walking behind it. Mark, do you think it could be a cannon?" So far, he didn't know enough to have an opinion, and said so, adding, "What I saw of the village in the screen from the car, it looked pretty primitive. Of course, gunpowder's one of those things a primitive people could discover by accident, if the ingredients were available. We won't take any chances, then." "You think they're hostile? I was hoping they were coming out to parley with us." That was Paul Millard. He had a right to be anxious. His whole future in the Colonial Office would be made or ruined by what was going to happen here. The joint Space Navy-Colonial Office expedition was looking for new planets suitable for colonization. They had been out now for 4 years, which was close to maximum for an exploring expedition. They had entered 11 systems and made landings on 8 planets. 3 had been reasonably close to Terra-type. There had been Fafnir. Conditions there would correspond to Terra during the Cretaceous period, but any Cretaceous dinosaur would have been cute and cuddly to the things on Fafnir. Then there had been Imhotep. In 20 or 30,000 years it would be a fine planet, but at present it was undergoing an extensive glaciation. And Irminsul, covered with forests of gigantic trees. It would have been fine except for the fauna, which was nasty, especially a race of subsapient near-humanoids who had just gotten as far as clubs and coupe-de-poing axes. Contact with them had entailed heavy ammunition expenditure, with 2 men and a woman killed, and a dozen injured. He'd had a limp himself for a while as a result. As for the other 5, one had been an all-out hell planet, and the rest had been the sort that get colonized by irreconcilable minority groups who want to get away from everybody else. The Colonial Office wouldn't even consider any of them. Then they had found this one, third of a geostar, 80 million miles from primary, less axial inclination than Terra, which would mean a more uniform year-round temperature, and about half land surface. On the evidence of a couple of sneak landings for specimens, the biochemistry was identical with Terra's, and the organic matter was edible. It was the sort of planet every explorer dreams of finding, except for one thing. It was inhabited by a sapient humanoid race, and some of them were civilized enough to put it in Class 5, and Colonial Office doctrine in Class 5 planets was rigid. Friendly relations with the natives had to be established, and permission to settle had to be guaranteed in a treaty of some sort with somebody more or less authorized to make one. If Paul Millard could accomplish that, he had it made. He could stay on with 40 or 50 of the ship's company to make preparations. In a year, a couple of ships would come out from Terra with 1,000 colonists and a battalion or so of Federation troops to protect them from the natives, and vice versa. Millard would automatically be appointed Governor-General. But if he failed, he was through. Not out, just through. When he got back to Terra, he would be promoted to some home office position at slightly higher base pay but without the 300% extraterrestrial bonus, and he would vegetate there till he retired. Every time his name came up, somebody would say, "Oh, yes, he flubbed the contact on What's-It." It wouldn't do the rest of them any good, either. There would always be the suspicion that they had contributed to the failure. The wavering sound hung for an instant in the air. A few seconds later it was repeated, then repeated again. "Our cannon's a horn," Gofredo said. "I can't see how they're blowing it, though." There was a stir to right and left among the Marines deployed in a crescent line on either side of the contact team. A metallic clatter as weapons were checked. A shadow fell in front of them as a combat car moved into position above. "What do you suppose it means?" Millard wondered. "Terrans go home." He drew a frown from Millard with the suggestion, "Maybe it's supposed to intimidate us." "They're probably doing it to encourage themselves," Anna de Jong, the psychologist, said. "I'll bet they're really scared stiff." "I see how they're blowing it," Gofredo said. "The man who's walking behind it has a hand bellows." He raised his voice. "Fix bayonets. These people don't know anything about rifles, but they know what spears are. They have some of their own." So they had. The 6 who walked in the lead were unarmed, unless the thing one of them carried was a spear. So, it seemed, were the horn-bearers. Behind them, however, in an open order skirmish line, came 50-odd with weapons. Most of them had spears, the points glinting redly. Bronze with a high copper content. A few had bows. They came slowly, details became more plainly visible. The leader wore a long yellow robe. The thing in his hand was a bronze-headed staff. 3 of his companions also wore robes. The other 2 were bare-legged in short tunics. The horn-bearers wore either robes or tunics. The spearmen and bowmen behind either wore tunics or were naked except for breechclouts. All wore sandals. They were red-brown in color, completely hairless. They had long necks, almost chinless lower jaws, and fleshy beak-like noses that gave them an avian appearance which was heightened by the red crests, like roosters' combs, on the tops of their heads. "Well, aren't they something to see?" Lillian Ransby, the linguist, asked. "I wonder how we look to them," Paul Millard said. That was something to wonder about, too. The differences between one and another of the Terrans must puzzle them. Paul Millard, as close to being a pure Negro as anybody in the 7th century of the atomic era was to be pure anything. Lillian Ransby, almost ash blonde. Major Gofredo, barely over the minimum service height requirement. His name was Old Terran Spanish, but his ancestry must have been Polynesian, Amerid, and Mongolian. Karl Dorver, the sociographer, 6'6" with red hair. Bennett Fayon, the biologist and physiologist, plump, pink-faced, and balding. Willy Schallenmacher, with a bushy black beard. They didn't have any ears, he noticed. And then he was taking stock of the things they wore and carried. Belts with pouches, and knives with flat bronze blades and riveted handles. 3 of the delegation had small flutes hung by cords around their necks, and a 4th had a reed panpipe. No shields and no swords. That was good. Swords and shields meant organized warfare, possibly a warrior caste. This crowd weren't warriors. The spearmen and bowmen weren't arrayed for battle, but for a drive hunt, with the bows behind the spears to stop anything that broke through the line. All right, let's go meet them. The querulous, uncertain note was gone from Millard's voice. He knew what to do and how to do it. Goffredo called the Marines to stand fast. Then they were advancing to meet the natives, and when they were 20 feet apart, both groups halted. The horn stopped blowing. The one in the yellow robe lifted his staff and said something that sounded like "Wee-lee-lee-leek." The horn, he saw, was made of strips of leather, wound spirally and coated with some kind of varnish. Everything these people had was carefully and finely made. An old culture, but a static one, probably tradition-bound as all get out. Millard was raising his hands. Solemnly he addressed the natives. "'Twas Brillick and the Slithy Toves were whooping it up in the Malamute saloon, and the kid that handled the music box did gyre and gimble in the wabe. And back of the bar, in a solo game, all misty were the borogroves, and the mome rats outgave the lady that's known as Lou." That was supposed to show them that we too have a spoken language, to prove that their language and ours were mutually incomprehensible, and to demonstrate the need for devising a means of communication. At least that was what the book said. It demonstrated nothing of the sort to this crowd. It scared them. The dignitary with the staff twittered excitedly. One of his companions agreed with him at length. Another started to reach for his knife, then remembered his manners. The bellows man pumped a few blasts on the horn. "What do you think of the language?" he asked Lillian. "They all sound that bad when you first hear them. Give them a few seconds, then we'll have phase 2. When the gibbering and squeaking came to fall off, she stepped forward. Lillian was, herself, a good test of how human aliens were. This gang weren't human enough to whistle at her. She touched herself on the breast. "Me," she said. The natives seemed shocked. She repeated the gesture and the word, then turned and addressed Paul Millard. "You." "Me," Millard said, pointing to himself. Then he said, "You," to Louis Goffredo. It went around the contact team. When it came to him, he returned it to the point of origin. "I don't think they get it at all," he added in a whisper. "They ought to," Lillian said. "Every language has a word for self and a word for person addressed." "Well, look at them," Karl Dorver invited. "6 different opinions about what we mean, and now the band's starting an argument of their own." "Phase 2A," Lillian said firmly, stepping forward. She pointed to herself. "Me, Lillian Ransby. Lillian Ransby. Me, name. You, name?" "Boo!" The spokesman screamed in horror, clutching his staff as though to shield it from profanation. The others howled like a hound pack at a full moon, except one of the short tunic boys who was slapping himself on the head with both hands and yodeling. The horn crew hastily swung their piece around at the Terrans, pumping frantically. "What do you suppose I said?" Lillian asked. "Oh, something like, 'Curse your gods, death to your king, and spit in your mother's face,' I suppose." "Let me try it," Goffredo said. The little Marine major went through the same routine. At his first word, the uproar stopped. Before he was through, the natives' faces were sagging and crumpling into expressions of utter and heartbroken grief. "It's not as bad as all that, is it?" he said. "You try it, Mark." "Me, Mark, Howell." They looked bewildered. "Let's try objects and play acting," Lillian suggested. "They're farmers. They ought to have a word for water." They spent almost an hour at it. They poured out 2 gallons of water, pretended to be thirsty, gave each other drinks. The natives simply couldn't agree on the word, in their own language, for water. That, or else they missed the point of the whole act. They tried fire next. The efficiency of a steel hatchet was impressive, and so was the sudden flame of a pocket lighter, but no word for fire emerged either. To Niflheim with it, Louis Gofredo cried in exasperation. We're getting nowhere at 5 times light speed. Give them their presents and send them home, Paul. Sheath knives. They'll have to be shown how sharp they are, he suggested. Red bandanas, and costume jewelry. How about something to eat, Bennett? Millard asked Fayon. XT3 and CH trade candy, Fayon said. Field rations, extraterrestrial service, type 3, could be eaten by anything with a carbon-hydrogen metabolism, and so could the trade candy. Nothing else, though, till we have some idea what goes on inside them. Darver thought the 6 members of the delegation would be persons of special consequence, and should have something extra. That was probably so. Darver was as quick to pick up clues to an alien social order as he was, himself, to deduce a culture pattern from a few artifacts. He and Lillian went back to the landing craft to collect the presents. Everybody, horn detail, armed guard and all, got 1 10-inch Bowie knife and sheath, a red bandana neckcloth, and a piece of flashy junk jewelry. The town council, prominent citizens, or what, also received a colored table spread apiece. These were draped over their shoulders and fastened with 2-inch plastic pins, advertising the candidacy of somebody for president of the Federation member Republic of Venus a couple of elections ago. They all looked woebegone about it. That would be their expression of joy. Different type nerves and different facial musculature, Fayon thought. As soon as they sampled the XT3 and candy, they looked crushed under all the sorrows of the galaxy. By pantomime, and pointing to the sun, Millard managed to inform them that the next day, when the sun was in the same position, the Terrans would visit their village, bringing more gifts. The natives were quite agreeable, but Millard was disgruntled that he had to use sign talk. The natives started off toward the village on the mound, munching XT3 and trying out their new knives. This time tomorrow, half of them would have bandaged thumbs. The Marine riflemen and submachine gunners were coming in, slinging their weapons and lighting cigarettes. A couple of Navy technicians were getting a snooper, a thing shaped like a short-tailed tadpole, 6 feet long by 3 at the widest, fitted with visible light and infrared screen pickups, and crammed with detection instruments, ready to relieve the combat car over the village. The contact team crowded into the number 1 landing craft, which had been fitted out as a temporary headquarters. Prefab hut elements were already being unloaded from the other craft. Everybody felt that a drink was in order, even if it was 2 hours short of cocktail time. They carried bottles and glasses and ice to the front of the landing craft, and sat down in front of the battery of view and communication screens. The central screen was a 2-way, tuned to one in the officers' lounge aboard the Hubert Penrose, 200 miles above it. In it, also provided with drinks, were Captain Guy Vendinho and 2 other naval officers and a Marine captain in shipboard blues. Like Gofredo, Vendinho must have gotten into the service on tiptoe. He had a bald dome and a red beard, and he always looked as though he were gloating because nobody knew that his name was really Rumpelstiltskin. He had been watching the contact by screen. He lifted his glass toward Millard. "Over the hump, Paul?" Millard raised his drink to Vendinho. "Over the first one. There's a whole string of them ahead. At least we sent them away happy. I hope." "You're going to make permanent camp where you are now?" one of the other officers asked. Lieutenant Commander Dave Questel, ground engineering and construction officer. "What do you need?" There were two view screens from pickups aboard the 2,500-foot battlecruiser. One, at 10 power magnification, gave a map-like view of the broad valley and the uplands and mountain foothills to the south. It was only by tracing the course of the main river and its tributaries that they could find the tiny spot of the native village, and they couldn't see the landing craft at all. The other, at 100 power, showed the oblong mound with the village on its flat top, little dots around a circular central plaza. They could see the two turtle-shaped landing craft, and the combat car that had been circling over the mound, landing beside them, and sometimes a glint of sunlight from the snooper that had taken its place. The snooper was also transmitting in to the other screen from 200 feet above the village. From the sound outlet came an incessant gibber of native voices. There were over 100 houses, all small and square with pyramid roofs. On the end of the mound toward the Terran camp, animals of at least 4 different species were crowded, cattle that had been herded up from the meadows at the first alarm. The open circle in the middle of the village was crowded, and more natives lined the low palisade along the edge of the mound. "Well, we're going to stay here till we learn the language," Millard was saying. "This is the best place for it. It's completely isolated, forests on both sides, and 70 miles to the nearest other village. If we're careful, we can stay here as long as we want to and nobody'll find out about us. Then, after we can talk with these people, we'll go to the big town." End of Part 1.